Where do
So
you draw the line on what specifically, in terms of arms and weapons, are allowed? In other words, my interpretation, and this may be not nuanced enough. I say there are kind of two options in my mind. Either it applies to the weapons that were available when the Second Amendment was written, or there are absolutely no restrictions, and this goes to shoulder-mounted RPGs and everything. And let me just finish my thought here. If we are able to draw lines somewhere, the lines that the NRA wants to draw are no more or less legitimate than the lines President Obama or Dianne Feinstein may want to draw.
Disagree with that. And the reason I disagree with that is because I think that you can draw lines based on the principle. Now, the Second Amendment was not written for muskets. It was, and proof is in the pudding. If we're going to be that literal about the Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment says arms, it doesn't say muskets. If we're going to assume that it just meant stuff that happened at the time, then Piers Morgan has no right to be on TV because there were no TVs in 1789. And the freedom of the press doesn't use a printing press. So, I mean, as long as we're going to go there, we may as well go all the way. And that's
So then
obvious.
where do we limit to RPGs or nuclear arms? Those are arms, right?
No, they're not actually. If you look at the Second Amendment doesn't guarantee your right to own a warship, right? It doesn't guarantee your right to own a cannon. Even back
But hold on a second. One of the main tenets of those who are constitutionalists is that the Constitution only says what you can't do, and the Second Amendment doesn't say you can't own a warship.
No, correct. No, the Second Amendment. No, that is true. The Second Amendment
They're
doesn't
negative,
say that.
right? So in other words, it's not actually, you're wrong on that.
It prevents the government from infringing in areas where it says that you can't infringe. So that is actually this was the argument about the Bill of Rights at the time. Actually, the Bill of Rights are kind of different from the rest of the Constitution in that they carve out areas that the government cannot go. That's why there was argument about the Bill of Rights. The Constitution is a document of negative liberties. The Bill of Rights is also a document of negative liberties, but it carves out actual spaces where government can't go. That's why, I mean, you know this. This is why there was the debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists said there's no point to a Bill of Rights. It actually infringes our liberty because it says to the government that it can go all these other areas. The Second Amendment said, when it says that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, it also it doesn't. First of all, the Second Amendment applies to the federal government, not to the states. But that is a huge thing that has been overlooked in constitutional history. But even assuming that it applies to the states, the fact is that the state has always had and always did have the ability to prevent private citizens from owning cannon. I mean, there were laws on the books when the Constitution was written preventing people from owning certain types of weaponry.
So the argument you're making now is actually that the Second Amendment does not prevent anybody from owning warships, but it's the states superseding that Bill of Rights that would allow them to prevent someone from owning a warship. It's getting a little muddled, right?
It's not, though. I mean, that's correct. The Second Amendment doesn't prevent you from doing anything. I mean, the First Amendment doesn't prevent you from doing anything.
So you're okay with the states drawing the lines on what guns you can have, but not the federal government?
It's a restriction on government, right? I mean, the Second Amendment is not created as a restriction on individual. It's not a law about what guns you can and cannot own. It's a restriction on what the state can do. And what it says that the state can do is it says that the state is not allowed to infringe your right to bear arms. Now the question becomes, what is the definition of arms, right?
So I think most likely, this is interesting because we could probably go on 20 more minutes and we probably wouldn't come to an agreement on this. But I think this is really, we were doing fine agreeing on a lot of stuff until we got to this. And I think this is where a lot of people are getting lost also, I think.
It's a very simple argument from my point of view, and that is that people, if they have the right to bear arms in order to prevent tyranny, then that goes for arms to prevent. That goes to the ultimate limit of that is the arms necessary to prevent. Basically, you can own any arm that is necessary, not to prevent tyranny.
Well, this is good because in Waco, Texas, the government used tanks. Isn't it then reasonable to say people need tanks because they were used in Waco, Texas?
Because this is the balance that we draw. Right, and this is true for all legislation.
It's totally subjective, though, Ben.
It's not totally subjective. The fact is that if you disarm a population of rifles, there is no chance that it could be a popular resistance to tyranny. Period.
And if you only give them rifles and the tanks roll out, the rifles are useless.
True. It's just not true. I mean, I've spoken to veterans at the War College who have done studies of what would happen in case of an armed insurrection in the United States. If the American population is armed with semi-automatic rifles, the Army cannot handle them. Now, God forbid it should ever come to that point, obviously, and I don't think near that point now. But the argument that you need tanks in order to resist tyranny is not true. And obviously, the menace to public safety provided by tanks is significantly higher than the menace provided by a semi-automatic rifle, which, as you said, is not really the main threat in gun violence anyway.
All right. Well, I think on this issue, I think it's a fascinating discussion. Obviously, we're not going to agree, but hopefully the audience will be able to get some interesting stuff from this discussion.